All right, moving on. I have a little coach's corner segment.
Rare for you. You don't do a lot of coaches' corners.
I don't. I should, because it's the easiest stuff to put on an outline. But yeah, so I wanted to expand a little bit on uh, some of the information you covered in your big goal setting section, both from your article and from a recent episode of the podcast. And one of the things that I got a fair number of questions about, especially after the article came out, is like people asking, like, you know, I I understand like part of the goal hierarchy idea that you were talking about. People saying, like, I understand parts of this stuff, like the underlying process goals that underpin kind of the intermediate goals, and how you can have process goals that support multiple outcome goals and all of that. But there was a bit of confusion about what actual practical utility a superordinate goal had. So if you remember that podcast episode or that article, basically, if you're setting up a goal hierarchy, you have superordinate goals at the top, which are kind of uh, like an underlying value, like the thing that your outcome goals are supporting. So, let's say you want to improve your diet, you want to start exercising more regularly, things like that. Your superordinate goal might be related to either getting healthier or maintaining good health. So that's kind of like the overarching thing that everything else kind of flows from. So, I got some questions about like just what is the practical utility of having a superordinate goal. And I think one of the big things it does for you um, is I see a lot of people just, you know, across the internet in the Stronger by Science groups and Reddit and Facebook and whatnot, who will ask questions along the lines of like, hey, like, I don't know why, but like I've been pursuing these goals and I just have no motivation right now. What's going on? And oftentimes you kind of interrogate that, and you realize that maybe they just got it in their head, like, hey, like trying to get as strong as possible is a good thing to do for its own sake. So like I'm just going to do that. And maybe their training is going well, but like they're just having a hard time staying motivated to keep going to the gym consistently. And then you kind of interrogate it a little bit, and you're just like, well, why do you want to squat 500 pounds? Like, what is underpinning that? And oftentimes it's a question they haven't really even considered before. Um, and then, they think about it a little bit more, and they're like, ultimately, I decided I wanted to start lifting in the first place because, like, got into my 30s, used to be active when I was younger, found myself out of shape, and I said, I'll go to the gym. And then I met up with some power lifters, and they said, oh, yeah, like this is fun. You should try powerlifting, getting strong, very cool. So I tried it, and then, like, now I see, looking back a couple years later, I got into powerlifting, and, I fell for the idea that cardio kills your gains. And so, maybe my overall activity levels have gone down, even, even as I started training. Decided I wanted to be as good at powerlifting as possible. So moved up a couple weight classes when, maybe that wouldn't have been the best thing to do for body composition and general health. And then you look back on it and it's like, well, ultimately, like the superordinate goal, if they would have framed it that way, is still kind of the same. Like, they're still somewhere in their late 30s, and maybe they have a young family, and they're like, I want to be healthy. Like that's the main thing I'm interested in. And the initial steps they took were towards that superordinate goal. And then at some point, it kind of got diverted, and they kept setting outcome goals that were within the same general genre as when they first went to the gym, have some sort of quantifiable thing to progress on. But over time, their like intermediate outcome goals drifted pretty far away from what the ultimate thing they cared about was and the ultimate thing they wanted to accomplish. And to be clear, like I'm not just taking shots at powerlifting here. I see the same thing happen with like physique athletes all the time. Like, hey, I went to the gym because I wanted to get healthy, and now like I'm 6% body fat and my hair's falling out and my dick doesn't work. Like that's, maybe not the most compatible thing with optimal health. So, I see stuff like that happen pretty frequently where people start losing motivation and just never, like maybe never really interrogated in the first place why they wanted to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. um, or maybe they did but they hadn't really checked up on it in years. And so I think one of the benefits of having a clear superordinate goal is it helps you make sure that the actual actions you're taking and the like intermediate quantifiable goals you're pursuing are still in service of that thing you ultimately care about. And I think a lot of times when people do end up losing motivation, it's because the actions they're taking and the intermediate quantifiable goals they're pursuing um, are can become pretty badly misaligned with the superordinate goal that they care about. That if they would have been more explicit about like what's driving these outcome goals, maybe they wouldn't have drifted so far away from it in the first place. And I think that can help people maintain motivation. Like if your actions and your kind of underlying drives and motivations are better aligned. Um, that's just general advice for people, but it's also general advice for like trainers and coaches because I know that happens all the time too. Like, let's say a client comes to you and they say like, I just want to move better, I want to have more energy. And you're a trainer, and so first place your brain goes is like, well, okay, let's kind of set some quantifiable goals like that we want to pursue when training this person. So they say they want to move better, they want to have more energy. And so you operationalize that. It's like, if we can get this person to be able to, like, say, do a full squat and like do deep lunges that they can control pretty well relative to most of the population, that qualifies as moving better. And certainly for a lot of especially middle-aged clients relative to their starting point, that would be like clear, quantifiable evidence that they are moving better. And they want to get in better shape. So you say like, let's do some let's try to get them in better aerobic shape. And since it's kind of a personal training setup, generally your time with them isn't very long. And so you're not going to make them pay for a session where it's like, well, you're going to run on the treadmill for an hour and I'm going to watch you. So, you have them do some interval training in the sessions that you have with them. And so, early on, those things that you're doing, like just getting them moving, doing some intervals, that's very much in line with helping them get more energy and working on their mobility and their movement patterns, getting them to be able to squat and lunge well. That's very much in line with their goal of moving better. But then as time progresses, I think it's pretty easy to kind of lose sight of what those underlying motivations were in the first place. So, they get to the point where they can do a deep squat and do it well. They get to a point where they can do lunges with body weight and control it well. So the first place your brain goes as a trainer is like, well, now we're at the point of progressive overload. Like they can do the exercises wanted them to do. So now let's load them up a little bit. Same thing with the interval training. They start getting in better shape, and it's like, well, let's shorten the rest intervals or push the intervals a little bit harder or raise the intensity on them. Whatever, just basic progressive overload. And so, maybe the first 3 months you're working with this client, everything you're doing is very, very much in line with what their goals are and what they're trying to accomplish. But then you get maybe another 6 months down the line and you're training them as if they're like a sprint cyclist, trying to make like an Olympic team or something. And, like they've made a lot of quantifiable progress, but maybe after you kind of cleared that 3 month mark, maybe it's not necessarily in line with what they actually wanted to accomplish. And that's something I see from trainers a lot. It's like, oh man, like my clients were making progress, but like they stopped working with me. Like their motivation seems to be waning, but like they're getting so much stronger, or like they're losing so much weight. What's wrong? And it's like, well, like is that actually what they wanted? And like sometimes it is, and like clients just suck. But oftentimes I think it is a matter of just like a trainer kind of losing sight of what matters to the client, and just over time the goals you have set for them and the things that you're trying to pursue with their training program maybe drifts away from the underlying things that actually matter to the client. So yeah, I think that's one of the I think that's maybe the biggest practical benefit of having a clear superordinate goal, that you don't just mention once and then never really think about again, but that is actually like pretty close to top of mind a lot of times, especially as you maybe meet a goal and you're setting a new one. Just check back in, like, d- is this superordinate goal still my superordinate goal? Like, maybe have my underlying drives and motivation shifted over time? If so, that's great. If they haven't and it's still basically the same, are these new, like, quantifiable outcome focused goals I'm setting actually in line with this underlying thing that does ultimately matter to me the most? And as long as you keep that in mind, I think it becomes a lot easier to maintain motivation with the goals you set for yourself and to take actions that allow you to follow through.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because this is something I talk about with my clients a lot in
Mm-hmm.
coaching. Sometimes I'll have clients, fortunately, not too frequently because, in ideal scenarios, clients are loving their training, motivation's high, everything's good. But every
Mm-hmm.
now and then I will have this conversation with a client where, they'll kind of mention that motivation has been really low. And, it's not just like, I had a tough week. It's been weeks of low motivation. They'll bring that information to me, and I kind of feel like I get the sense that they're expecting some tough love,
Yeah.
like I'm supposed to say, well, you gotta want it bad,
Yeah.
or something like that. You gotta tough through it. And that's never been my approach. And even before I dug into this literature about superordinate goals and things like that, but it's always seemed really intuitive to me that if you are sensing low motivation for a sustained period of time, you don't really have a motivation problem. You don't really have a willpower problem. You have a misalignment problem, like you mentioned. Like, the issue there is, in my opinion, oh, we have a dog that entered the room. The issue, in my opinion, is that what's happening is, like you mentioned, there's some drift going on, and our program now is not currently facilitating the pursuit of a goal that is still super important to that individual. And so we need to realign those things. So my first thing is not to do the whole tough love thing and say, hey, you got to pick it up and just do it. I encourage people, take some time to think about, what are we doing this for? Well, do we need to reassess what some of our intermediate goals are? Do we need to reassess what our superordinate goal is? And I think finding that alignment usually sorts out a lot of the motivation related issues.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I try to get my clients away from when they're feeling that kind of like low motivation, everything that we're doing is just kind of grinding and toiling. There are some short-term scenarios where you do have to grind out some tough training blocks. But in many cases, I think a lot of times people, they kind of create this dichotomy of like instant gratification versus delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And some people adopt so much focus on delayed gratification that they don't enjoy a damn minute of their training career
Mm-hmm.
because they're always like, oh no, in 20 years when I'm way stronger, like this will all be worth it. And so what I try to get people to embrace is the idea of continuous gratification,
Mm-hmm.
where of course we're leading towards some kind of goal that's important to us, but like, if we are not enjoying that process and feeling great about taking the steps toward it, I just think there's a huge missed opportunity to really love what you're doing there. So
Yeah.
it seemed like you disagree with me.
No, I don't disagree with you. I think this is a one of my spicier takes. I think the whole concept of delayed gratification is actually complete bullshit. Um,
So you agree with me more than I thought.
yeah, yeah. No,
Wow.
I don't think anyone does it.
Yeah.
I think that largely, I think everyone is kind of doing the continuous gratification thing, and I think that a lot of people who swear up and down that they're doing delayed gratification were just like taught and acculturated into a particular mindset that gives them a little dopamine rush when they do something that is typically associated with delayed gratification,
Yeah.
such that they're actually getting their gratification
Yeah.
in the short term. Like, the classic example that people always come back to is like, saving your money instead of like spending it every time your paycheck hits. And like, I used to think that with that I was doing delayed gratification, but dude, my parents just like drilled that into my head from day one. Because like they didn't come from a particularly well off financial background, and so like for me and my brother, they just drilled into us from a very early age, like spending all of your money is bad, saving money is good. And so like, when I would save, I used to be like, oh, I'm doing this good virtuous thing, like I'm delaying gratification. And then I thought about it, I'm like, no, it stresses me out to spend money, and I like saving money. Like,
Yeah.
uh I don't know, like I'm doing the thing that in the short term makes me feel good, because it was like so drilled into me at an early age that like, no, it, like if you spend this money, that's bad. So I don't know. I think that um that's like a mindset that my parents instilled in me that's helpful in a lot of ways. But there's no delayed gratification going on. Like,
Yeah.
spending that money would stress me the fuck out. Like, that would not be short term gratification. Um, so yeah, like I don't know. I'm sure that there's a little bit of that goes on, but I think that a lot of behaviors that people associate with delaying gratification, I think a lot of it is motivated by just like underlying cultural values that they were taught, and kind of like a sense of duty and whatnot. And so that like when you do those things, it makes you it makes you feel good, because you think like, oh, I'm doing the good thing right now. So yeah, I think everyone's doing the continuous gratification thing. I think that's a completely bullshit and unhelpful false dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, in either case, if you are noticing that you are really dragging your feet through training, whether it's because you're locked into this concept of delayed gratification, or because you just haven't spent a lot of time pondering about what your superordinate goal truly is. If you find yourself in a position where your training just feels like a chore and like a second job that you dread going to, something is off. You should address that. And the recipe to success there is not more willpower and generating false motivation, because it probably ain't going to work.
Yeah.
Definitely not in the long term.